Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on another rendition of our Wednesday weekly walks. My name is Ryan, and welcome to Central Park. We know, of course, even as it gets warmer and into spring, it can still be difficult for a lot of us to make it to New York and Central Park. So we want to continue bringing the park to you through all of our in-person and virtual programs, like our weekly walks every Wednesday at 12:30. Thanks again for joining us for another weekly walk as we get further into the spring season and we see the park starting to light up, both with sunlight and a lot of fresh spring blooms. Spring and April really marks another anniversary though, and today we're going to give you a special look at the park through the eyes of Frederick Law Olmsted, one of the park's creators. Now, you may be familiar that Central Park was designed by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted. That name, Frederick Law Olmsted, sticks out because no matter where you're from in the world, you might have experienced a landscape that was either created by Frederick Law Olmsted, one of his sons, or really just taken inspiration from this early landscape architect. As we explore around the park today, we're going to honor Frederick Law Olmsted because this April marks Olmsted 200, the 200th anniversary of Frederick Law Olmsted's birthday. So today we're going to be exploring around the park, seeing some landscapes we've probably seen before, but hopefully look at them with a little bit fresher perspective as we put on our Olmsted goggles and try to see the park through some of his amazing ideas and principles. Now, thank you again so much for joining us on this Olmsted Weekly Walk with me, Ryan, on today, April 13th, 2022. As always, we're going to be together for about 15 minutes as we explore through the park, and you're going to see a lot of photos that were taken by myself here in Central Park. Now, you're probably familiar with us here at the Central Park Conservancy. We're the nonprofit that cares for the park, keeping it clean and green. Our mission being to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Now, as we make our way through the park today, virtually using Zoom, please let us know if you have any questions. Please say hello using the chat feature. And if you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature. And my colleague Emily is on the back end answering any questions you might have. Last thing you'll see pop up are some visitor polls I'll launch throughout the walk today. And once everybody's voted, I'll share the results. Lastly, you will also notice live transcripts are enabled. If you don't want to see the transcripts, you do have the option in your toolbar on Zoom to disable live transcript under, I believe, a little CC icon that says live transcript. As we move through the park today, though, again, we're going to be exploring some landscapes you've probably seen before, starting in an area we pretty frequently visit over near 72nd Street and 5th Avenue, and make our way into my favorite landscape, the Ramble. The Ramble is a great landscape to really discuss Frederick Law Olmsted, not only because it's my favorite, but also because it was the second landscape created in the park and one that really helps to emulate what Frederick Law Olmsted's idea for the park was, a complete immersion in nature. So as we explore through the park, we're going to look at some of the different ideas that Frederick Law Olmsted applied to the park to give it its naturalistic feeling, and again, make us feel immersed and help us escape from the city. Now, as we start off, I want to bring up this historic photo. It's one that I regularly think of when I pass through the park, especially going under or over any of the park's 30 bridges or arches. We can see a few different gentlemen in this photo, all of which were extremely helpful to Central Park and really just New York in general. On the far left of this photo, we can see a man named Andrew Haswell Green. Second from the left, we can see George E. Waring Jr. Pictured right here in about the middle, third from the left, is one of the park's parents, Calvert Vaux, as I like to call them. Right next to Calvert Vaux, fourth from the left, we're going to see Ignaz Anton Pilot, a gardener for the park. Next to him, fifth from the left, is going to be Jacob Ray Mold, a gentleman who would help Calvert Vaux really design a lot of the bridges and archways in the park. And last but not least, the character on the far right, the one whose birthday we're celebrating, Frederick Law Olmsted, who would be born in April 26, 1822. I had to do my math there for a moment. So we do see this really being a tremendous anniversary to help celebrate Frederick Law Olmsted, who just did an immense job at creating naturalistic landscapes back during a time in the 19th century when this was a brand new idea. But of course, one that is very much appreciated today, especially after the past few years where urban escapes have been really a heaven sent for us. So as we explore around the park, we can again start and think back to 200 years ago, or a little less than 200 years ago, when this park was being constructed and really taking the shape that we still have today. Now, as we begin, we're starting on 5th Avenue and 72nd Street, an area we've entered the park before, over at a location known as Inventor's Gate. And of course, fresh blooms are coming out, which we'll see in just a moment. But before we start to see blooms, we'll see things like statues as we enter the park. Now, a lot of us know statues were not desired by Frederick Law Olmsted. He felt that they were urban intrusions to the park's naturalistic beauty. But of course, a lot of statues were given as gifts. And we see a lot of statues flooding into the park during the late 19th century and early 20th century. This is a statue of Samuel F.B. Morse. We probably think of when we think of the telegraph or Morse code. He was very influential in helping to create those and establish this form of communication through a single wire telegraph. Interestingly enough, this statue, which was sculpted by Byron Pickett, would make its way to the park around April 27th, 1871. That's a day after Frederick Law Olmsted's birthday. Interestingly enough, the statue would also be dedicated on Samuel F.B. Morse's birthday, which is April 27th. Another thing that's interesting is he was still alive while the statue was being dedicated. He actually did not show up to the statue's unveiling because he thought it was a little odd to have a statue unveiled of him while he was still living. This is an idea that we see really shared by Frederick Law Olmsted. And just a few years after, he would help to establish a statuary committee that would really limit the amount of statues coming into the park and set really an idea for what they should suffice. One, they should be approved by an artist board. And two, the person should be dead for at least 5 years before they get a statue. But an interesting start to our walk as we make our way into the park. And of course, we're going to start focusing now on the naturalistic beauty, which is what Frederick Law Olmsted would have wanted. And as we start to cross the street, you know what time of season it is. It is cherry blossom time as people flood to the park to see these beautiful blooms. Luckily, there's many different species. So even if you don't catch the Yoshinos, which are one of the earlier blooming species, you can later see the Kwanzan cherry trees. But these trees are certainly being enjoyed by a lot of people, especially as we welcome in this 70-degree weather, which hopefully sticks around for a little while. But as we enjoy these trees, we can come up close and really just enjoy the beautiful, subtle white and pink colors coming from these Yoshino cherry blossoms. Now, I don't have time to talk about how these trees really arose over to the US and how this cherry blossom tradition began, but we do offer a lot of cherry blossom tours. Most of our current Yoshino cherry blossom tours are sold out, but we do have Kwanzan cherry blossom tours coming up soon. So if you want to learn about really the deep history of these trees, I encourage you to come on those. For now, we're going to just enjoy the beauty of these blooms visually as we start making our way to the Ramble. Now, as we wrap around the park, we can really talk about some of the different ideas and things that really help to make up an Olmsted landscape. There's really about 15 general principles that we see being a commonality amongst Olmsted landscapes. And Olmsted would design a lot of different landscapes. I'd actually like to launch a poll right now just to see if you've happened to be in an Olmsted landscape or visited a park, a college campus, maybe driven on one of the roadway systems in Buffalo, many different diverse things that he's actually designed beyond just Central Park. Of course, we have Riverside Park and Prospect Park and Morningside Park, just to name a few of these parks throughout New York. But I'll let everybody vote in that. And as we're voting in this, I'd like to talk really quickly about really some 15 commonalities we see amongst Olmsted landscapes. Now, I probably don't have time to list all of them, but I want to just go over a couple things like really having man-made works of art, having contrast with the city, having bold landforms, a balance between things like turf, wood, and water, a series of planned sequential experiences, and the separation of traffic, which we can see here. Now, those are just a few of the commonalities, but we'll try to discuss a few more as we go. What we can see here is Trefoil Arch, and that helps to really satisfy the separation of traffic. We have different forms of traffic passing through the park, and luckily we don't have to come into contact with them, as we have a carriage road passing over this specific arch, while a pedestrian path takes us safely underneath. Now, as we start to make our way through Trefoil Arch, I'll share the results to that poll, and it looks like a lot of us, about 70% of us, have had the opportunity to make it to some type of Olmsted Park. And of course, there's a lot of different landscapes beyond just parks to explore. If you haven't already, maybe you've been to one that you just didn't know was an Olmsted landscape. As we continue through Trefoil Arch, we'll come through this arch, which I always feel really like all the bridges and arches are like portals in the park. And as we come through this portal on a more formal side, we'll immediately be transformed into a more naturalistic landscape as we wrap around the boathouse and start coming into the woodlands. And as we start to pass on this more natural trail, we can enjoy some of the fresh blooms that are coming up during the spring season. Again, there's always something beautiful to see. And as we make our way down the path, keeping our eyes out, we can see some beautiful plants like some type of violet. I think this is a sweet violet. Whatever it is, it looks absolutely beautiful with that nice fading white bluish color. As we continue by, we can also see another favorite of mine that has a deeper, rich blue and purple color. This is a Virginia bluebell, and we start to see a lot of Virginia bluebells popping up along the season. I love having that purple and blue or violet color on the same flower at the same time, but really fun to see these early spring blooms coming into the park. We can also see some things that might not have a lot of color, but have a lot of beauty in their natural symmetry. These were catching my eye a lot as they start to come up and slowly unravel. These are May apples, and as they eventually pop up, we'll start to see patches and groves of them come as their sort of star-like flower starts popping up. But a really beautiful little plant that'll be covering the ground and making it a lot greener. As we continue now through that woodland area, I want to bring us down to an interesting point within the Ramble called the Point. As we make our way down these paths, we can enjoy again walking on a more naturalistic trail or a path that's not paved, rather made of wood chips or dirt, helping us create a more immersive experience as we walk through, getting to not only see a lot of plants, but feel them on the ground. And we're walking along the lake, the first landscape created in the park, which would be followed by the Ramble, which is why I think this is a wonderful area to explore to honor Frederick Law Olmsted. Of course, seeing people back out and boating, which is now open, renting them from the low boathouse and sailing around the lake and all along this beautiful shoreline of the point. As we make our way down this path, we surprisingly have a little bit of the park to ourselves. I think some rain were keeping people out in the early mornings, but of course it's open and we see not only people, but wildlife returning all over the park, like plenty of turtles. This one having a pretty prime spot, not actually crowding onto the rock with dozens of other turtles, like some of the other spots we see around the park. So we'll let that turtle enjoy his prime location by himself and make our way past some of the beautiful blooms like forsythia, which we can see here on the left. As we come up, we can enjoy again some of these different experiences that Olmsted provide us. I think this is a great point that show really some of the subtle, amazing designs in Olmsted's landscapes. You'll notice there's an opening here, which gives us a perfect view out to the lake and Bow Bridge. This was purposefully left clear of trees. Olmsted would do things like this to help provide a beautiful contrast. And we can see quite a few examples of commonalities in his landscape here. We can certainly see a contrast with the city as some of the buildings stick out behind. We certainly get a balance between elements of turf, wood, and water here without a doubt. We can also see some human-made architecture in the form of these rustic benches. The architecture also blending into the landscape. Very appropriate since we're in a woodland to have wooden constructed architecture here. We certainly see a lot of really amazing variety here as well. And really parks characterized by variety is certainly a big element of Olmsted's creations. As we make our way down just a little south of this point, we come to the edge of the point, which is what this path is called. And from here, we can see the most formal section of the park, looking at it from probably the most naturalistic area. But here we can see the only desired statue and fountain for the park, the Festa Fountain, or the Angel of the Waters. You can also again see people enjoying the beauty of this landscape from the boats, which is what Olmsted would have wanted. If you joined us the other week for Emily's boat landings weekly walk, you probably learned all about the boat landings and learned about another idea that Olmsted had to help people really explore areas like the Ramble in a more natural way. Rent a boat, sail around the lake, dock up at a boat landing, and then get lost in the Ramble, which is really the purpose of it. The Ramble being an English word for wandering without a specific path or destination in mind. And that's often what we do as we get lost in the Ramble. As we walk back up north now, we can come up this path, which seems very simple and easy. A lot of these woodlands seem like they're very easy to care and even make, but they're anything but. And these landscapes take a lot of work to help create. Even a seemingly simple dirt path like this We can actually see this path being created back in the 1980s, around 1981. These paths take a lot of human work to go into creating them. And of course, even the simplest area and landscape really has a lot of nuance to how it's cared for. But luckily, we have a lot of wonderful volunteers and operations that are able to construct a lot of the pathways and architecture we see here in the park today. As we travel back, we can again thank people as early as Olmsted, as well as more modernly, for helping to keep this park looking beautiful and what it is. As we make our way now, we can get a little north, we can get lost in the Ramble a bit, taking a left, right, straight, and really just turning ourselves around. Why have a path in mind when we can just get lost and see what we come to? And of course, there's always surprises to see as we make our way around. One of the things that's a favorite of mine in Olmsted Parks is this planned, really a series of planned sequential experiences. These planned sequential experiences will take us through various landscapes, like maybe walking down the mall with all those elm trees, bringing us towards the Angel of the Water statue, and then having Bow Bridge, which transports us into the Ramble, getting so many different types of landscapes. And as we walk through the Ramble, we can certainly see that even in one woodland, as we come to Azalea Pond, a small water body in the middle of the woods. Azalea Pond getting its name for some of the azaleas, which just a few of them are starting to bloom now, but in the next coming month or two, we'll see them really lighting up. We see these areas getting this name Azalea Pond for these bushes, which are upwards of about 100 years old, or at least that's what the rumor is. As we make our way around past Azalea Pond, we can follow this waterway a little bit and enjoy some of the rustic architecture Olmsted had really intended to put in the park. We see a lot of this, again, having different types of almost Victorian influence in some ways, but really creating more of a rustic feel for the park. Having these that blend into the landscape, because architecture in a natural park or naturalistic park shouldn't stick out, but rather blend in. We see this rustic bridge really doing a perfect job of taking us over this little waterway, the Gill, and really giving a frame, or really just not stepping over the natural beauty and the bold landforms, another characteristic of Olmsted Park, which we can certainly see in the Ramble. Most magnificently, the Manhattan schist rock outcroppings, which are present all over. The use of these contrasting landforms and bold landforms, especially the natural ones, were a favorite of Olmsted. Anybody see the person that's climbed up the top of this rock? Right towards the middle right, we can actually see them wearing a little blue jacket up here, giving us a little bit of a scale as to how large this rock is. As we make our way past these large rocks, we can walk along the water, which just adds such beautiful, serene walks, adding a little bit of a sound and flow of water to our walk. We can enjoy really just the immense beauty of this water, which is extremely clear because, as some of us may know, the water in the park is supplemented from old Croton aqueduct water systems. So it is basically drinking water running through the park, although don't recommend grabbing a drink from here. I recommend using some of the water fountains, which will be turned back on in the coming weeks or so. But of course, a beautiful little walk to have and a beautiful sound to experience as we follow the Gill to where it spills out into the lake. As we travel down, we can come to the top of this overlook. This is probably one of my favorite little areas in the Ramble. It's called this kind of cascade. Doesn't really have too much of an official name. Kind of meant to just be whatever you want it to be. But what it certainly is a beautiful view as we make our way along the top and head to the bottom to get a perspective from the lower side. You can maybe see the railing. We're just walking alongside up here where my mouse is highlighting. But a nice little drop that follows this watery stream down. And of course, giving us a nice little natural rock path to walk along, pictured on the right-hand side. Looking back to inspiration for Olmsted, we can think about his travels as a young man, early on exploring the Connecticut countryside, but eventually going over to areas of New Hampshire, the White Mountains of Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as far as New York to Niagara Falls and the Catskill and Adirondack Mountains. Views like this were certainly big inspirations for Olmsted, as well as for painters. A famous painting school we'd see start appearing during the 19th century. Some of you may have heard of it, the Hudson River School of Art, taking its inspiration from the same areas Olmsted did as a younger man, from Catskills, Adirondacks, and the whole Hudson River Valley. This is a favorite painting we can see pictured here of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, called Kindred Spirits by Asher Brown Duran. And this beautiful piece is really what we see inspiring a lot of people, and certainly inspiring Olmsted in his naturalistic designs of Central Park, Prospect Park, and various others. We can actually see painter Thomas Cole, who's kind of pictured on the right here, as well as a gentleman to the left of him, William Cullen Bryant, whose Bryant Park is named after, pictured here, exploring an area of the Catskill Mountains. But really, again, a view we can almost kind of capture from our previous standing point atop that little ravine cascade area. As we look back to how this area was made, of course, things have changed a lot, and doing restoration in the woodlands does a lot of times now require machinery. We completed a major restoration of the Ramble around 2018, and one of the major focused areas was here, where we had to reposition a lot of rocks that had eroded and fallen down over time due to damage from the surrounding landscape, helping to reposition that little rock bridge we just walked over and help to create the more picturesque flow of water and the view we have from down below. And of course, these restoration projects certainly pay off because the views we have are just tremendous. And today, with the city growing around it, we have really even more of a highlighted representation of that one Olmsted commonality, a contrast with the city. I personally love this view. It's one of my favorites, I think, in the park, where we get the beautiful architecture of Central Park West and the beautiful combinations of the lake, the Ramble where we're standing, a little bit of Hearn's Head or Ladies Pavilion pictured on the right, but really just an amazing day, perfect weather, and perfect views we have here. As we travel down, making our way to our last stop, I do want to launch a last poll. Or actually, I'll wait just a moment and then I'll launch that last poll. But as we make our way to our last stop, we're going to be coming down the path a little bit, and of course can see a lot of beautiful trees around the park. One that always sticks out to me around here are some of the different honey locust trees. Honey locust typically being a species of wood we use for a lot of rustic architecture. Pretty identifiable because it has this deep furrowed rigid bark. The other couple weeks back, actually, I had the pleasure of giving a tour in the Ramble, and we uncovered a bat that was nesting in between one of these. We are seeing a couple migratory bats, about 3 species of migratory bats that stop through the park, as well as about 6 species of cave bats, which you can imagine they just nest in caves. They usually stay here year long and do kind of a little hibernation during the winter. But some of the migratory bats will stop by, nesting in between some of the deeper ridged bark of trees, as well as sometimes bat boxes, which we can see a lot of times bat boxes in parks now, providing a little bit of a shelter for bats in areas which they may have lost from the deconstruction of some of these croppings that previously might have contained caves for them to nest in. What we used to see in the Ramble is something pretty similar. It's fitting that we have a lot of bat boxes in parks because traveling through the Ramble back during the 19th century, we would have seen bee boxes. Beehives or bee boxes, like we can see pictured here in this wood carving from 1869, show some of the whimsical discoveries we might have had. And we probably know about the sheep that once lined Sheep Meadow, but other discoveries like these beehives in the woodlands would have made it just, again, a truly more immersive experience, and one that almost is representative of like a wild zoo, but really cool to have discovered these. Of course, today there aren't any bee boxes in the park, but you can still find beehives and wasp hives occasionally that are popping up in the high ends of the trees. And keep an eye out for those in the winter as they become more visible. But as we make our way up the path, I do want to bring us to something that would have originally existed. It has been recreated, but would have originally existed during Olmsted's time, but has still continued to this day. As we make our way up to the top, or last stop, we can come to a beautiful wooden rustic shelter. And as we discuss a little bit of this, now I'll launch that last poll, which is, what is an Olmsted element that most sticks out to you? What I've listed here are some of the commonalities amongst Olmsted landscapes that we see really all over. I only had the ability to list about 9 or 10 here, so there are some that are unlisted, but if you do think of something that sticks out to you that's not listed here, definitely write it in the chat, because we'd love to hear what is most really, again, influential, or what sticks out most to you. But as we come up to our final stop, we come to a rustic summer house. There would have at one point been said that there were about 6 to 9 originally created here in the Ramble, which I always have trouble imagining because that's so many for a kind of small landscape. We know of at least 3 that did get constructed and were completed throughout the Ramble. This was actually one of them. This is, however, though, the only one that remains today. It would be recreated in about the 1970s, I believe, getting of course, a few touch-ups over the years. But this piece is absolutely immaculate, even in its current condition. And coming up, we can again see old summer houses that would have once existed. There would have been a few different designs, some that were a little bit more open and pavilion-like, some that were a little bit more enclosed. But we can see here one example, as well as another example of a different summer house, actually an example of the one we're kind of coming up to right now. But we can see really amazing rustic architecture existing as early as the 1860s, as this was one of the first landscapes to be created and would relatively early on be fitted with some of these rustic shelters. Of course, today we do only have this one remaining in the Ramble, but it's something that we certainly look forward to creating in the future. And I think that's something really interesting to think about is, again, Central Park's work is never done. We can certainly enjoy the beautiful wood features of these structures, which typically last about 15 or so years before needing replacement. However, sometimes you can make them last a little bit longer. We would see this one being reconstructed, in 1982, not the 1970s. But in 1982, this would come really helping to be funded by an interested citizen. I always love this. It reminds me of the Arthur Ross Pinetum, which was, as we know today, funded by Arthur Ross, but initially started as an anonymous donation. Of course, this is a great example as to really the work behind Central Park. While we at the Central Park Conservancy do a lot, we would be nothing without our supporters, our contributors, people that help to fund some of these major restoration projects, as well as people that just care for the park, helping to preserve what we already have restored. And as we know, there's no finish line to the recreation or restoration of Central Park. There is always something left to do, so our work here is never done. And we do look forward to, in the future, being able to recreate at least the other 2 summer houses that once existed in the Ramble. But today we can certainly enjoy again what we have, and while we have it, enjoying the beauty of this lesser visited summer house within the Ramble. As we come to an end, I do want to share the results of that poll I launched, and let's see what the winning one is. It looks like the highest favored Olmsted commonality is an integration of architecture into the landscape, which is very fitting, especially for this final stop we're in, seeing some of those rustic bridges, these rustic summer houses, and these areas that certainly blend into the landscape without really overstepping or taking away from them. Of course, the natural beauty is still the main focus here, but this just adds a little bit of something extra. I certainly agree with those. Definitely some amazing, really, commonalities. And really, any of these is an amazing one. Even things like visitor services and having opportunity for people, because that wasn't originally an idea for parks. We start to see that coming during Olmsted's time. But really, so many amazing things we can talk about relating to Olmsted. And of course, there is a lot more of Olmsted information on the way throughout this entire month, not just by us, but by other organizations. You can certainly find more information out on the Olmsted 200 website, or learn a bit more on our website. We do have a few Olmsted 200 tours going on, such as our Olmsted 200 Parks in Conversation. Now, this tour is pretty much sold out. I think there are only just a small handful of tickets left for some of the tours. So if anybody would like to check out the availability of these, you can find out more on our website. I believe Emily will also drop a link for some of these programs. Again, this program is pretty much all sold out, but we do have plenty of other programs that incorporate information from all over the park, such as our Kwanzaa Cherry Blossom tours, which are going to be following the current Yoshino or Cherry Blossom on the Reservoir tours. Those are going to be starting in the beginning of May, hopefully around the time we're starting to get some of these beautiful pink blooms coming in. But of course, whether you're coming to the park to see spring blooms, learn about the history, or explore the trees, there's plenty of different tours that we offer. And again, you can check the chat to learn about some of those upcoming programs, or go on our website, centralparknyc.org, to find the full list of upcoming events and tours. But we really hope to see you out in the park in person, but we also look forward to seeing you again virtually on our weekly walks and our other longer 45-minute virtual programs. But thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for celebrating Olmsted Parks. Again, April 26th marks Olmsted's 200th birthday, and we encourage you to get out into an Olmsted created park and celebrate for yourself. I want to thank you again all for joining us today as we come to the end of our tour, and remind you, of course, the park needs us and we need the park. We'd love to hear what the park means to you. Share that with a hashtag, the park needs us, and we might feature it on our social media channels. But of course, we look forward to seeing you on future programs and weekly walks. I will leave the chat open for a little bit longer in case there's any last minute questions I can answer. But without any further ado, again, I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to let everybody know, please stay safe, be well, and we hope to see you soon. Take care, everybody.